You're all very welcome. My name is Philip Cottrell, and I'm a lecturer in the School of Art History and Cultural Policy at UCD. And what I want to do through the magic of Zoom for the next 15 minutes or so is talk you through how art history works at UCD. And there are three questions particularly I want to look at, three questions which hopefully may have already popped into your sphere of consciousness. What is art history? How will I learn? And what can I do with an art history degree? So for a start, in terms of just the basic question of what is art history? What does the subject consist of? Well, it's an historical and critical study of the visual arts. And when we're talking about the visual arts, traditionally, we're talking about three main things. It's the kind of stuff you find in museums. So painting, for instance, we look at the history of painting from antiquity to the present day. Here's a very lovely 16th century Venetian painting by Bonifacio de Petati. But we also look at sculpture, of course. We look at what we call the plastic arts. That's art in three dimensions. And of course, sculpture is not always inside a museum and a gallery. So the study of sculpture also takes us outside the classroom. And quite often, we're looking at the museum itself, or at least we're looking at the building and its style. We're looking at architecture. And here is a beautiful example of medieval architecture. This is Notre Dame in Paris. Not quite looking like that at the moment because it's under restoration after the recent fire. So those are the three main categories of the visual arts. And in our subject, we're engaged on tracing the development, the stylistic evolution of those three main categories, looking at artists and also their customers, patrons, and the role of the visual arts throughout history and culture. But increasingly, art history is also about modern media and more up-to-date contemporary forms of the visual arts, such as photography, but also film, video, performance, installation art, and anything that really has a serious claim to be considered as art. And some of these contemporary forms can be a little controversial. And here I'm illustrating this idea with an installation piece by Dominic Thorpe, who was a recent artist in residence at UCD. I think his mum must be very proud of him with this particular work. So, you know, this kind of edgy, provocative stuff is also what art history is interested in, you know, as it tries to categorize and define exactly what art is and its role in culture and society. And in this context, we're interested in the wider realm of visual culture. And when we say visual culture, we mean the nature of our cultural response to and reliance on images. We all rely on and traffic images every day in our everyday life through our mobile phones, through TV, through the media. So art history has a relevance more than ever, I would argue, to modern society. So we're not just looking at the art of the past, we're looking at contemporary art. And when we do look at the art of the past, we also look at it in its present context as well. In general terms, thinking methodologically, how do we approach the subject? Well, at its root, the subject is really an object-based discipline. Traditionally, we've always thought in terms of works of art as something tangible, something we can touch, or at least something that we can experience directly. And in terms of how the subject traditionally works and still does work to a large degree, what we do with a work of art is we interrogate it. An art historian is often like a detective sifting through lots of visual evidence, firing questions at a work of art in order to understand its significance, its origins, how it came to be here, why it was created. So often when we look at a work of art in an art history tutorial in a class, or when we're writing an essay, we fire basic questions at the work of art, like who made it, where is it, how did it come here, is it in a condition that is reliable, is it similar to how it was when it first appeared, where was it originally installed, what was its original significance, why was it made? All of these questions crowd in terms of how the subject tries to process and understand works of art as a gauge or a barometer of culture throughout history and throughout society. But really, all of these questions come down to one basic question, and this is at the root of what the subject is about. Why does a work of art look the way it does? Now, art historians and art history students may discuss works of art in a myriad of ways, take a myriad of approaches, but fundamentally, what we're interested in is trying to define and understand the appearance of a work of art and trace how works of art really appeal throughout history to our most important faculty, sight. Now, in trying to answer that question, we also have to divide the subject into various important strands. One particular strand of inquiry is our interest in artists, their biographies, their role in society. We're interested in issues of authorship, professional identity, and how artists kind of fashion themselves, see themselves, understand their role, and how they are in turn understood rather by their patrons and wider society. And I illustrate this particular facet of our subject with a detail of a self-portrait by one of the first great female artists of Western culture, Artemisia Gentileschi, who emerged at the start of the 17th century and blazed a trail in terms of her creativity and in terms of her gender, overcoming lots and lots of cultural, contextual prejudices, which helped to frustrate the careers of women artists. But she was somebody who was a pioneer in this regard. So art history is interested in her narrative and the stories that we tell about other artists too, and how art functions as a reflection of an artist's biography and an artist's individual creativity. We're also very, very interested in connoisseurship and what's also known as visual literacy. That is a heightened visual acuity when it comes to understanding, recognizing, and diagnosing the essential properties of a work of art. So a good art historian should be able to look at a work of art from a certain period and make certain sensible assumptions and decisions about its age, its authorship, its general context, its symbolism, or rather its iconography. And so one thing that we ask our students to do is, can they develop an expert eye? Can they identify how a work of art was made just by looking at it? Can they date works of art on the basis of style, interpret subject matter, you know, without cheating, without just looking at the label on the gallery wall or taking the work of art off the wall and looking on the back for some other kind of data? So we're interested in the kind of skill, for instance, which would allow somebody to recognize an original work of art, such as on the right here by the Renaissance artist Titian, and be able to differentiate and understand how it is essentially different from a very, very close copy by a later artist here on the left, Peter Paul Rubens. So understand the visual language that an artist or a particular school of art employs. We're also interested in more abstract ideas, more intellectual ideas related to that branch of philosophy we call aesthetics, which deals with the nature of art and beauty. So the subject often considers broader, sometimes more baffling questions such as what is art, how can we define it, what is the nature of beauty, etc. And in order to navigate the subject, we also are interested in reviewing how we use labels and categories to help find a pathway through what is sometimes a very confusing maelstrom of different styles and movements in art. And not only are we interested in trying to categorize and label the complex myriad facets of art throughout the ages, but we're also trying to review and understand our own prejudices and our own subjectivity as we label and categorize and define art. And in this process, we're constantly trying to think about art in its historical and social context, asking questions such as how does art reflect, enforce, or challenge social relationships and structures? And in this, institutions often have a role to play, not just galleries and museums, but schools, universities, academies. They often give us many received ideas about art and about a hierarchy of art. What is great art? You know, is it the kind of stuff that you put on your fridge, or is it the kind of stuff you have to go into a gallery to see? So we're very interested in thinking about the history of hierarchy in art and how institutions have played a role in handing down certain ideas about how art and culture has functioned in certain historical periods. And to help us in this quest, we also have the examples of great theorists and art writers who have helped shape our subject, going right back to the first proper art historian, Giorgio Vasari, who was a painter and architect working in the middle of the 16th century in Italy, a great friend of Michelangelo. There he is on the left, and here's the founding father of the discipline. But we are also, of course, very engaged with more modern contemporary writers such as Gombrich, Griselda Pollock, and Walter Benjamin. They have helped us shape the subject in its engagement with how we understand, appreciate, and interpret works of art. Now, in terms of the nuts and bolts of how you learn the subject, how the subject is conveyed to you at UCD, well, of course, at the moment, everything is distance learning because of COVID, but hopefully once the vaccine kicks in, this time next year, we will go back to how we usually deliver the subject, primarily on campus, through lectures, tutorials, and seminars. This slide always makes me laugh because the lights are on. Art history students are essentially the vampires of the university campus, in that most of their classes are bathed in darkness so we can better see images. But that doesn't mean that you can just sneak into the back and have a snooze. It's a very engaged, very interactive, very discursive subject, art history. Very interested in your opinions, your arguments. We want to know what you think about works of art, what your response is. And a lot of what the subject is about discussion, analysis, in a group environment, but also on your own or in small groups. Tutorials and discursive workshops are very, very important to the subject. And another aspect of the subject, which is extremely important and which helps to recommend this subject to lots and lots of students, is how often we get outside the classroom. We're very interested at looking at works of art in the original, or even in their original context. So it's not just about going to galleries and museums, it's about visiting art that's still in its original location. Here on the right is a field trip to Rome recently. And that reminds me that we're not just interested in making the best use of all the very rich, important art collections in Dublin, whether it's the National Gallery or the Chester Beatty Library or the Hugh Lane. We're also very, very interested in getting outside Dublin, getting outside Ireland, and traveling further afield. And many of the cities that we often visit include London, Paris, Berlin, Rome, and Venice. So there is a cosmopolitan, international aspect to this subject. It's a very, very important aspect or facet of what we do, looking at works of art in the original, in sometimes rather exotic locations. But while we often look at works of art as a group, independent research is very, very important. As I said, this is an analytic subject. We're very interested in your opinions and your ideas and in how you develop an intellectual and a personal engagement with works of art. So independent research, writing dissertations and essays, where you can, to some degree, shape the subject matter and shape the issue that you're going to discuss. That also becomes important for us. And we're very well set up for that in terms of our resources. We have our own reference, non-lending library, the Françoise Henri Reading Room. This is a study space and reference library, which is used very intensively by our students. Also something of a social space as well. And another selling point for our department is that it's a fairly small department, a very collegiate department. We all know each other very well. All the lecturers will know students by their first names eventually. And so it also has an appeal as a place where you have a social unit that can help you in your study. We try to knit our students together socially as well as intellectually, because there's a very beneficial reciprocity there if we do. We have a slide and digital image library. A lot of what we do involves presenting to class. Students have to kind of put on their own class presentations, and we have resources which help them do that. And in terms of what you can do with an art history degree, well, I mean, traditionally, I suppose if I was doing this 10 or 20 years ago, as I did actually 20 years ago, I'd be often pushing the more traditional aspects of the vocational side of an art history degree. So careers in heritage, such as a gallery worker, a museum director, tour guide, careers in the commercial art world, such as an auctioneer, but also working in publishing and as a picture researcher. But generally, really all walks of life now use images so much. Wherever images are used persuasively or extensively to communicate ideas, an art history degree is going to give you a certain edge because it really tries to fashion a heightened visual awareness, a more advanced sense of visual acuity, an understanding of how works of art function as a tool of propaganda and communication. So wherever images are used, whether it's in publishing, the media, advertised, but also increasingly in business, there is going to be some aspect of your experience as an art history student, which is going to give you a certain edge and a certain insight into the way images are used. Now, I think I've got just a couple of minutes left just to talk you through very briefly what the art history curriculum looks like in first year. So here I'm basing some of this on what's already in our timetable, but also it's not going to really change before autumn 2021. So let me just summarize. If you do join us as an art history student next autumn, there's 2 modules running, and both of them are designed to offer a kind of complementary foundation into traditions of Western art. The first one, the art of the ancient and medieval worlds, is a kind of chronological survey course which looks at the foundations of Western art in the culture of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and how this very secular society then transforms itself in the Middle Ages to one that's very religious, which is dominated by Christianity and the Catholic Church. And we look at the way in which art goes from a sense of realism tempered with idealism to something that's far more ornate, decorative, and spiritual. So it takes the history of art up until around the year 1300. But at the same time, there's a course that I run, the Art of the Renaissance. And this looks at a very, very important fertile period in Western culture from around 1300 to 1600. And it's at this time that some of the first great superstars of Western art emerge, whether it's Michelangelo, Raphael, Leonardo, or Titian. And this is a very important course to take in first year because many of the ideas and the prejudices and preconceptions we have about art and an artist's role in society are first emergent during this period of rebirth and reform that we call the Renaissance, heavily associated with the culture of Italy, but also a pan-European movement as well. And then in spring 2022, we have 2 further modules. One, Baroque to Romanticism, covers art in the 17th and 18th centuries, going from the stark, almost cinematic realism of Caravaggio up until the Romantic era of Turner and Constable. But also there is another module running in the spring, which looks at the birth of modern art in Europe in the late 19th, early 20th century. Now, to progress with art history as a degree subject, you only need to take 2 of these. We recommend you take all 4 because they function as an important foundation in the traditions of Western art. But the minimum is to take 2 of these. I think one of these will probably be core for you. I think that's the art of the ancient and medieval world. But watch this space as to the details of next year's curriculum. Before I go, I just want to highlight that if you go into YouTube and you search under Art History UCD, you'll get several lavishly produced videos where you'll hear more from me and more from my colleagues as they introduce the subject. And there are also vox pops from students. And get yourself on the internet and you'll be able to engage with us via Facebook. We also have a blog that you can link to via the UCD Art History website. If you have any questions at all, I'm not sure whether we have time for me to take them now. I'll defer to Ema and Roisin, who are staging this for us today. But you can always email me at philip.cottrell@ucd.ie. So thank you very much. And as we say in Manchester, ci vediamo.
That was great. A lot of ground covered, a lot of periods covered in a very short space of time. So thank you very much for that. We've had a lot of questions about trips. And field trips in ordinary times. What sort of level of touring would there be and visits to other cities?
Well, at undergraduate level, it's an optional feature at the moment, although in the past we have run particular modules based around cities such as Paris and Berlin. Those are the cities that we've gone to with undergraduate students in the past, mostly because of their art collections. So it's not just a question of looking at German art in Berlin, it's looking at a more kind of cosmopolitan suite. But we also have not just modules that are based around cities, but we have a trip that runs each year, which is open to students at first, second, and third year. These are not necessarily related to your assessments or a particular module, but they are seen as a very, very important facet of how you gain a grounding in the study of the visual arts. And that usually runs every January. Obviously, because of COVID, it's all on hold at the moment, but let's hope that that is back next year. And then that builds at a higher postgraduate level in our taught MA to whole courses which are really heavily engaged with the art of foreign cities. And generally speaking, the places we've been to, Florence, Venice, Rome, Paris, we don't go anywhere grotty, basically. We always go to nice places, but at reasonably priced accommodation.
Another really interesting question that we got was around what subjects do you think work well with art history in the joint honours DN 520?
Well, there's always been a kind of traditional alliance with subjects such as English and history. I myself did English and history at Aberdeen University, which had a modular program, a bit like UCD's, and that's the great advantage of the modular program at UCD, in that you can take art history as an option and then decide whether you want to take it on as part of your degree. But increasingly, we find students who are doing it with politics, sociology, philosophy. You think about nearly any other subject in the humanities, and even a few outside the humanities. Quite often, art is going to come up as a serious subject for discussion at some point as a means of communication, propaganda. We have a lot of medics interested in art history. A lot of people doing medicine because art and medicine, progressed hand in hand during the Renaissance. So it really is a very, very good fit. It's very cognate with lots and lots of different subjects. And to be honest with you, I can't really say that there is a kind of prescriptive relationship I would promote. But archaeology would be another one that would be a very, another traditional ally of ours.
What are popular destinations on Erasmus for art history students traditionally?
We've had people going to Germany, Spain, Italy. Those are the ones that are particularly important. Of course, this is where art history and languages really forms a very kind of strong and popular combination. Because as brilliant as Irish art is, or British art for that matter, some of the best stuff is Italian, Spanish, German, Netherlandish. And in order to study that stuff, you need sometimes a language to really, really understand its place in its culture. So language is very important. And Erasmus year is a very popular choice for our students.